Before our first baby was born, people gave me all sorts of parenting advice. Breast or bottle, Montessori or mainstream, sleep training or contact naps. But no one warned me that one of the biggest parenting decisions I had to make wouldn't actually be mine. Somewhere between buying, arguably too many, tiny outfits and choosing a school, I discovered that if you want your child to participate in modern society, technology isn't really optional anymore. Homework is online, school newsletters are via an app, reading lists are digital, friends organise birthdays through WhatsApp groups, grandparents want to FaceTime, even the sports club does a warm-up to a video. Suddenly the question isn't, should my child have screens? It's, how do you raise children intentionally inside a system that isn't being? The digital footprint dilemma. Balancing screen time and ethics for the next generation. Recently, the UK government announced plans to introduce a social media ban for under 16s. That was before we changed Prime Minister again, but whatever happens politically, it reflects something that many parents already feel. We know far more than previous generations about persuasive technology. We understand algorithms. We know about infinite scrolling. We know that companies compete for attention because attention is profitable. We know our children's data has value, and yet we're simultaneously raising children inside schools, healthcare systems, and communities that increasingly assume constant digital participation. That contradiction fascinates me as a 90s kid who grew up without pervasive tech, because this isn't a video about being anti-technology, it isn't about judging families whose children use screens, and it certainly isn't about pretending my own family has solved this puzzle. It's just about something much bigger. We're the first generation trying to parent children whilst fully understanding how digital addiction is designed. And I don't think society's caught up yet. Part 1. We know how the machine works.
You're going to have a lot more time to fill.
The government will ban access to social media for all children.
What will you do?
Stare at a wall.
I don't actually think screens are the villain. Well, which might be a surprising thing to hear from someone who's about to spend the next half an hour talking about children and technology. Because the problem isn't that technology exists. It's given me a job that can work flexibly around my disabilities and parenting. The problem isn't even that children enjoy it. I too loved a good Saturday morning of cartoons as a kid. Rogue from X-Men the Animated Series was my gay awakening. The problem is that modern technology, and particularly social media, wasn't primarily designed around children's well-being. It was designed around keeping us looking for just a little bit longer. That's a fundamentally different parenting dilemma from the one our parents had. As we spoke about in my trans laws video, every generation thinks the newest technology is destroying childhood. Sometimes those fears are exaggerated. Violent video games don't actually create violence in children who aren't susceptible to it. Sometimes those fears are completely wrong. The comic book did not melt children's brains, but what makes this time different? Well, one of the strangest things about becoming a parent for me is realizing that we are this first generation of parents trying to raise children whilst also understanding in extraordinary detail how attention has become a commodity. Our parents worried we'd watch too much television and said we'd get square eyes. Did anyone else genuinely fear that would happen? We worry because we know someone spent millions of pounds making sure we can't stop watching. Television mostly wanted you to watch the programme, and it might have some adverts during the breaks to tell you what the next programme coming up would be, but modern platforms increasingly want you never to leave. Scroll, autoplay, notifications, recommended. Does my feed ever end? How am I meant to go to sleep if I haven't reached the end? Will it end? That's literally how many of these systems are designed. Surveillance capitalism unilaterally claims human experience as free, raw material. Shoshana Zuboff, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Harvard scholar Shoshana Zuboff argues that today's largest technology companies don't just simply sell products. They collect behavioural data, predict future behaviour, and increasingly intentionally shape that future behaviour. In other words, your attention isn't just valuable, it's the product. Now, before anyone panics, no, I am not telling you to throw your phone into the sea. I quite like mine. I've met some of my best friends online. My career exists because of the internet. Millions of disabled people like me have found community and answers online. LGBTQ+ people have realised we aren't alone because of the internet. The internet changed my life for the better, which is exactly why I think this conversation deserves nuance. Because I didn't get access to the internet until I was a teenager, and I had already built critical thinking defensive skills that stopped me from clicking on malicious malware or links that are more extreme than expected. Sidestepping the demonetization gods today. And kids today have AI to contend with. Brain rot slop, yes, but also very convincing content, some of which is built around real events and only slightly altered. Why children are different. Located directly behind your forehead, the prefrontal cortex is the brain's main command center for coordinating actions with goals. It's like that little control panel from Inside Out, but with gloopy brain bits rather than cute characters. It manages high-level thinking, emotional regulation, and self-control, from predicting the outcomes of your actions to maintaining focus whilst filtering out external or internal distractions and stopping automatic reactions, so you can choose better, delayed options. If I wait for 2 minutes without eating this crisp, I can get a second one. Yay! Thanks, brain! It also manages your emotional and social regulation, both internally by calming intense emotions like anger and fear, whilst reading social clues to build empathy. Hey, that was my crisp. What? It's okay, you earned it. And externally, by shifting your behaviour when social or environmental conditions change, allowing you to adapt to new rules. But this is your house, so we should share. As children, our brains are in the phase of initial formation, laying down neural pathways as we experience the world around us and experiment with our actions. Remember the tiny scientists we were talking about in this video? As teenagers, our brains are involved in a long, continuous phase of heavy structural rewiring, synaptic pruning, and pathway integration where the prefrontal cortex slowly refines its network. You've probably heard that your prefrontal cortex only stops developing when you're 25, but this is, in fact, a myth. Whilst it finishes its main structural maturation around your late 20s to early 30s, it actually has a level of neuroplasticity after that point, meaning it continues adapting and strengthening pathways through continuous learning, mindfulness, and active habits. So it's never too late to learn new habits. Unless you have ADHD, in which case it's a constant struggle. Eating. Meals? Is that something that genuinely comes naturally to the rest of you? Do you not have to set yourself a timer to remember to eat? Mind blown. Regardless, young children do not have developed prefrontal cortexes, which means they find impulse control, delayed gratification, and emotional regulation genuinely harder. And they're supposed to. That is childhood. That's how they learn. So when adults say, I can stop scrolling whenever I want. Firstly, can you? Wait, what day is it? But secondly, you're comparing a fully developed adult brain to a 5-year-old whose brain is literally still wiring itself together. What does the evidence actually say? Well, here's the tricky bit. The internet is full of headlines saying screens are destroying childhood and TikToks about how iPad kids are the worst generation ever that can't read, hold a conversation, or even put food in their mouths without lights flashing at them. But the research is much more complicated than that. Good research doesn't get clicks like scary headlines, though. Scientists generally agree that what children are doing on screens, how much they're using them, what they're replacing, and whether an adult is involved all matter enormously. Watching a film together with your family as each of you debate what will happen next isn't the same as endlessly flicking through algorithmically recommended short-form videos on a personal screen 2 inches from your face. So my 6-year-old having his own phone is fine then. I mean, he's only using it for educational and creative purposes. I'm sorry, did you just say 6-year-old? His best friend has a phone. It was hard to say no, and so do most of the children in his year. There are areas where the evidence has become increasingly consistent. Research finds associations with sleep disruption, reduced physical activity, reduced sustained attention, lower language exposure, and lower executive functioning. One of the biggest concerns is simply displacement. A day of childhood has 24 hours. If more hours are spent sitting in front of a screen, something else disappears. Is it reading, outdoor play, conversation, pretend play, sleep? According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, children learn best through 2-way communication. Screens don't automatically harm children, but they can replace experiences that are especially important for development. But he's only watching educational shows. Even the cartoons teach him about kindness and sharing and Miss Rachel. Look, we stan Miss Rachel for many reasons, but increasing babies' screen time is not one of them.
I don't know if you've heard of Miss Rachel, but she's a speech and language pathologist. He's learned a lot of words from Miss Rachel, and he can point out like a giraffe when he sees that, those animals at the zoo. And I'm so curious, even in that case where it's purely educational,
it's not good for them.
Okay.
Yeah, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out and said no screens before 3. And I'm like, that's still young.
Across 80 countries, as Jean was just saying, if you look at the data, once countries adopt digital technology widely in schools, performance goes down significantly, to the point where kids who use computers about 5 hours per day in school for learning purposes will score over 2/3 of a standard deviation less than kids who rarely or never touch tech at school.
Now we know that being a digital native does not confer an advantage. For many kids, it's a curse because it messes with the kids' attention systems and their motivational systems.
UNESCO's 2023 Global Education Monitoring Report reviewed evidence from around the world and concluded that there is surprisingly little robust evidence that simply adding more digital technology to classrooms improves learning outcomes. Instead, it warned that technology should be used only where it demonstrably enhances teaching and learning, rather than just being adopted for its own sake. All of the current Fortune 500 CEOs use a pencil and paper at school. The people who built the internet learnt to read from textbooks, not screens. They've also very openly said that they would never give their own children tablets and instead send them to low-tech school.
When they asked Steve Jobs, boy, your kids must love the iPad. Steve Jobs said, my kids don't have an iPad. He wasn't kidding. There's no technology. At dinner, they're talking about art and history.
Oh, they want everyone else's children to use them, but not their own. Capitalism for thee, not me. Although to be fair, I guess if you're a tech developer on the hardware end, wouldn't it make more sense to have a soldering iron in your kid's bedroom than a finished iPad? What would they be learning from that? But my kids' school is always going on about how tech savvy they are. They clearly think more screens automatically means better preparation for the future. Did someone say surveillance capitalism? The evidence just isn't that straightforward. The early years. Young children learn in spectacularly analog ways. They learn by touching, watching, copying, falling over, asking why, then asking it another 47 times. As Professor Kathy Hirsch-Pelsick writes in her 2026 book, Becoming Brilliant, babies don't learn best from screens. They learn best from responsive human interaction. That's because language isn't just words. Trust me, I am deaf. I very much do not always understand the words you are saying to me, but I have been watching and noticing your facial expressions, movement, eye contact, pauses, turn-taking on conversations, and where your attention is focused. Those are difficult to recreate through passive screen use. How are you expecting babies to learn? Okay, no. Parents aren't trying to raise children in laboratories. Maybe they should be. Definitely not the takeaway here. We don't live inside perfectly controlled scientific experiments. We live in actual houses, with washing that needs hanging, emails from clients that need to be replied to, right this very second or the world will end. Grandparents want to FaceTime, multiple children, sick days, yours and theirs, complete burnout, or just our normal, everyday disabilities. And of course, no one should be judging something that helps a neurodiverse child move more easily through a world that was not built for them. Yet.
Do I need my TV to babysit for me right now? Whilst my 2 eldest children are getting high on sweets upstairs, absolutely I'm going to use this hour to reset the house. You're all out here stressing how much screen time we have. Whilst I'm out here using it as a babysitter. I don't know what the mums that don't do screen time want. A fucking round of applause.
I think it's unrealistic for a lot of parents to not do any screen time, whether you're working from home or you're a student or you just need a little break. So I think the key word is balance.
Ugh, my kids just need constant stimulation, but with zero awareness that I have a baby to feed or bottles to wash or dinner to make or my other shoe to find. At least when they're on the sofa, I know where they are. And sometimes our intentions and rules about screen usage need to be relaxed. And that's okay, because guilt has never been an evidence-based parenting strategy. Trigger warning for delicate stomachs in this story. We took 3 children under 5 on a 13-hour flight from the UK to visit family in Malaysia. Rupert, who was 4.5 at the time, hasn't ever had a lot of screens. He has the choice to watch a film with us on Sundays during his sister's nap time, but it's just one of a number of activity options, and he often chooses something else or wants to just keep doing what he's already doing. So his tolerance for screen media is very low. I packed a whole bag of airplane activities for him, but if you need him to just sit still and not move because you're dealing with explosive vomiting, emergency nappy changes, and wiping down every surface nearby whilst attempting to be as quiet as possible with sleeping twins, then talking animals will easily amaze him into a shocked state. Doesn't even need the headphones, just talking cats, wearing boots, moving around. God bless whoever put that on the BA entertainment system. Intentional parenting doesn't require perfection. But that's different. A one-off isn't. You don't know other people's situations, but you do know how the internet works. You understand persuasive design, algorithms, data harvesting, and behavioral prediction. None of that helps the problems the screens solve, okay? I don't have any help at home, and sometimes I just need to go for a wee in peace. This conversation feels emotionally exhausting because we know more about the ills of technology than any generation before us, but we're also expected to raise children inside these systems increasingly built around these very things. And we have no control over the wider society that's pushing it. We are the first parents who understand that many apps are intentionally designed to maximize time spent rather than well-being, which raises a much bigger question. What happens when the way you want to parent collides with the way society expects children to grow up? Part 2, the myth, the complete control. I think one of the biggest lies modern parenting quietly tells us is that if you can just make all of the right choices, your child will grow up exactly the way you hoped.
Stop.
Which sounds lovely, but isn't how children work. Perfect parenting doesn't make a perfect child. I am shocked. We imagine intentional parenting as making perfect choices, like though we're the sole architects of our children's lives. Choose the right toys, read the right books, follow the right routines, limit the right foods, curate the right media, and somehow everything else will simply fall into place. But children don't just grow up inside our houses. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, usually people mean practical support, like babysitting, meals, someone to pick them up from school, or come over when you're having a crisis. But villages don't just help raise your children without teaching them or influencing them. From their teacher, grandparent, football coach, to a best friend, school playground, or even shop displays. Every adult your child meets is quietly demonstrating what they believe is normal. Every classroom, every birthday party, every relative, every supermarket toy aisle, every stranger who tells your little boy, oh, aren't you strong? Or tells your little girl, aren't you pretty? They're all teaching, which means intentional parenting isn't simply about what happens inside our home, it's also about helping children to understand everything that happens outside of it. So, for anyone who doesn't know, I'm a Quaker, a member of the Religious Society of Friends. Yes, I know you may not have been expecting me to be religious, not to not like other religions, but we're the type who believe in radical equality and peace, also getting arrested for what we believe in, tale as old as time. As a pacifist, my children do not play with toys made in the image of weapons. No, not even water pistols. We've had to decline invitations to birthday parties or skip a day of summer camp because the activity was weapons-based. Rupert does fully understand and agree with this, by the way. I am not unilaterally making decisions for him, but as a parent, it is my job to explain why we do certain things in our family and why other people do things differently, without a moral judgment either way. Does that stop him from somehow having picked up the ability to recognize a Minecraft sword on an advert in a shop? No. Has he ever played or seen someone playing Minecraft? No. Has he worked out from context clues in other children's conversations that everything in Minecraft is square? Yes. Does he now think anything pixelated is Minecraft? Also yes. But I'm not panicking because I can only control what's within my control, and he knows our family values. In 1979, developmental psychologist Yuri Bronfenbeller proposed something called the ecological systems theory, the idea that child development is shaped by interconnected systems, not just parental choices. They develop within layers of relationships, and that is as it should be, from family to school to community to culture. This framework is particularly useful because it validates parents who feel that their values are constantly being negotiated with schools, relatives, media, and institutions. As so many of you shared in the comments of my video about gender-neutral parenting, many of us avoid stereotyped toys for our children. Then we visit relatives where everything is pink or blue. Many of us also avoid screens and fast-paced media. Then find out the nursery showing them workout videos with dancing squeaky fruit. Disclaimer, that happened to a friend. Or we're avoiding added sugars because they're babies, but somehow this first birthday party only has sweets? They don't even have the teeth to chew sweets. I know! And social media may make you feel like every tiny mistake you make is awful, that if you don't respond to attachment in the exact perfect, validating yet authoritative way, that you've created a deep psychological wound within your child and they're never going to get over it. But we need to take a collective breath and realise that every one of those layers influences who a child becomes, and family is the closest circle. Which means, if your child comes home saying something that makes you think, what on earth have they been watching? It doesn't automatically mean you've parented badly, or that their life is now ruined. Well, no. No, there is enough pressure on parents as it is. Do you see the crumbling world around us?
Point taken.
Your child did not absorb a lifetime of gender stereotypes after Grandma said one time, no, that's for girls. They just encountered a new idea, and you can then explain your view on it and let them know that they don't need to be limited by other people's thoughts. They're free to make up their own minds, but whilst they live in your house, they should know the rule is tiaras are for anyone who wants to wear a tiara. Fight me. I dare you. Okay, you're getting a little. The exact same thing happens with technology. You can be completely screen-free at home, then yeah, nursery has tablets for learning the alphabet. Big cousin lets everyone play Roblox.
Oh, definitely don't do that.
School homework arrives on an app. Grandma FaceTimes every Sunday. Suddenly, it isn't your parenting plan anymore, it's society's. So we should fight society. What? Parents don't fail, systems collide. Well, yes, but it's freeing, isn't it? Yes. All these parents are carrying enormous guilt over influences they were never realistically going to eliminate, but it's not your fault. It's someone else's. I mean, that isn't... Yes, that's definitely the thing, what she said. It's an impossible checklist. No screens, no sugar, no stereotypes, no adverts, no plastic toys. Perfect emotional regulation. Yes, exactly. No peer pressure, no bullying, be polite, but own your power. Yes, it's a lot. But my point is just not to feel guilty when it doesn't always work out. Intentional parenting isn't about controlling every influence, it's about helping children interpret the influences they inevitably encounter. So let's just cut the influences off. Oh. Children can't cope with the internet, so let's just ban it all. We should let the government step in and deal with it. And that would definitely make my life easier. And I'm not the bad guy who has to turn the Wi-Fi off in the evening so they'll go to sleep. From spring 2027, the UK Parliament will be banning users to use the social media for children under the age of 16. No TikTok, no Instagram, no Snapchat, no YouTube. There will also be a default overnight curfew for 16 and 17-year-olds and no stranger communication or live streaming for minors at all. They will need to track all of our information for everyone though, just to make sure they know how old we all are. Well, hopefully it will be the government who keeps that information and not the big tech. You know what? I'm sure they'll work it out by then. It's fine. It's fine. It's worth it to keep children away from all the various ills of the internet. Bullying, sexuality, political or religious extremism. But parenting researchers increasingly talk about co-regulation rather than control. Children gradually learn emotional regulation, decision-making and critical thinking through repeated conversations with trusted adults, not by being perfectly protected from every difficult influence. This idea is reflected across developmental research on scaffolding and guided participation, particularly the work of Lev Vygotsky and later scholars who describe learning as a social process rather than an individual one. Sure, the internet has a lot of social learning and it sucks. 3 kids in my son's class have already been bullied online and they've only been in school for 2 years. How are your 6-year-olds even on the... Okay, never mind. Oh, the school automatically gave them email addresses. Email! I mean, who are they emailing? The gas board? No. They're taking awful pictures of each other and then emailing them to everyone in the school like complete blockheads because their names are on the emails, but they don't get that because they don't know how to use email because they're 6. You seem personally aggrieved. And now my son's about to get expelled because he sent an inappropriate picture. Ah, there it is. That escalated quickly. But it's not the existence of an email address that made your son send something inappropriate over it. Children cannot avoid the culture around them, but children can learn to question culture because eventually your child will meet someone who thinks boys don't cry, someone who thinks disabled people shouldn't become parents, someone who thinks queer families aren't real families, someone who thinks likes equal self-worth, someone who thinks algorithms always tell the truth. You can't stop them from hearing those ideas, but you can make sure they already know how to ask, what makes you think that? And you can't stop them from being near other children doing dumb things on the internet, but you can make sure that they know their digital footprint is for life. If you're acting like this is all the parents' responsibility, that it's our fault. We need this ban to keep our children safe. But it won't. A blanket social media ban for under 16s is opposed by many experts and child welfare groups because it limits social connection, creates unintended risks, and removes corporate responsibility. Also, what is social media? This is YouTube, where I go to learn how to fix the hinge on my washing machine door. It's not exactly the same thing as having people yell at me on Twitter. No, I'm not going to call it X. No. Of course you would say that. You're a YouTuber. Yeah, I'm also a queer disabled person who found being a teenager incredibly isolating. Except for this great group of like-minded, long-distance friends who I talk to over message boards. Online platforms offer vital community and belonging for marginalised, isolated LGBTQ+ or neurodiverse teens, and those spaces also foster creativity. They're encouraging places to discuss youth activism, art, learning, and self-discovery. That's nice, but what if it goes wrong and devolves into bullying? Yeah, that's a very rosy viewpoint there. Okay, well, firstly, I don't think you can just always assume that things will go wrong. And secondly, digital networks provide pathways to mental health resources, crisis support, and trusted guidance. I've had to talk a few friends down over the internet, and I've been able to send them links whilst doing so. Should that really be your job? Where are the adults? Not all adults are supportive of their children. Exactly. We can't trust every parent to teach their child internet safety, so like she said, it's better to just cut the whole thing off. How is that your takeaway? Cutting off the internet completely risks displacement and delayed preparedness. The teens who can will likely bypass bans and migrate to less visible, unregulated and riskier online corners. Age gates are easily faked or bypassed using shared devices and virtual workarounds. And cutting the others off without any actual plan in place to teach them proper digital literacy is stopping them from learning digital resilience, leaving them unprepared when they suddenly hit age 16. Didn't you just say your children can't use the internet? Well, 2 of them are actual babies, but yes, we age-gate things in our house, including the internet, so that we can build a solid base of knowledge, maturity and critical thinking skills before just letting them loose in the sandbox. I guess that makes sense. It's not like iPad kids have all the tech skills right now anyway.
There are some who would say, well, my 6-year-old being computer savvy, that's a huge advantage.
No, it's not. It's not. We thought it was because in the 90s, kids who played with computers learned hardware, they learned to program.
And of course, you look at like Bill Gates and he started doing tinkering with computers.
That's right.
And
That's
Stephen
why
Hawking.
Because that used to be true.
And one of the skills they don't have is the ability to protect themselves online from not just bullying, but also their data being stolen or exploitation. They need a VPN, like Surfshark. A blanket ban absolves big tech companies. It's a blunt tool that shifts the blame onto children rather than forcing companies to fix addictive and unsafe algorithms. And I don't want to have Reddit scan my face or my ID just so I can keep updated on House of the Dragon gossip. Oh, is that still worth watching? Oh yeah, no, if the first 2 episodes of this season had been the last 2 episodes of the previous season as they were originally meant to be, then I really think it would have been a great season 2. And season 3 is actually very... Sorry. Yes. Sorry. How about combating the youth mental health crisis? Social psychologists point to a sharp rise in youth anxiety, depression, and self-harm that aligns directly with the widespread adoption of smartphones and social media in the early 2010s. I think it got me too. Constant exposure to heavily filtered, idealized lifestyles and body types drives severe body dysmorphia and low self-esteem, particularly amongst young girls. Or how about private messaging giving awful people unhindered private access to children, bypassing parental oversight entirely? Not to mention the radicalization pipeline. Exactly, yes, thank you. Recommendation algorithms can quickly rabbit hole vulnerable minors into extreme content, including eating disorder communities, self-harm forums, and political and religious radicalization. Extortion. Right, yes. Teenagers and children have been coerced into sending explicit images and then blackmailed, or even had their parents financially extorted because of it. Children are losing real-world experiences and have declining academic focus and... Yes, I know. Look, I'm not ignoring that those in favour of banning social media for children under 16 focus on protecting developing brains from addictive algorithms, reversing a documented youth mental health crisis, stopping online predatory behaviour, and relieving parents of an impossible enforcement burden. I just don't think that 16 or 18 is a magical age at which our dopamine pathways will no longer be affected by the platforms engineered to exploit them through variable reward systems. Yes, the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed under 16, making teens uniquely susceptible to addictive design features like infinite scrolling, and yes, constant notifications and late-night scrolling actively disrupt sleep patterns, which are critical for physical and cognitive development during puberty. But we can't just label something an inherently unsafe consumer product that requires strict age regulation without putting in place true digital education or looking at the product itself. We make people learn to drive before we give them a license, and we regulate how safe the car must be. Literally every piece of homework the school sends is on this app. Tell me more about digital education. Definitely not what I meant. But yes, we are simultaneously telling children that digital platforms may be harmful enough to restrict, whilst increasingly requiring them to engage with digital technology to participate fully in education. Part 3. Schools want digital children. There was a moment that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. Like a lot of parents, I spent years thinking very carefully about screens, even before my children were born. Which programs felt calm? Which apps should we avoid? How much time feels appropriate? How do we build a childhood that isn't constantly interrupted by notifications? Then I looked at schools. The very thing that I had taken for granted was a negative and should only be used in small doses was being lauded on every school website. We have Chromebooks for every student. Okay, well, great, but I don't want my child to have one when participation requires a password.
They're provided the Chromebook, we're expected to teach with it. They're provided the technology, and I'm given this humongous TV screen in my room, and it's a great tool. However, all we do all day is stare at screens.
A lot of teachers use technology as a babysitter or even a co-teacher when they've checked out and they don't want to teach anymore. You let the computer do all the teaching and learning while you sitting back there, I don't know what, shopping on Amazon? Or scrolling through Pinterest?
A lot of these kids don't know how to read because they have had things read to them, or they can click a button and have something read out loud to them. Their attention spans are waning because everything is high stimulation. They can just scroll, watch less than a minute. They can't sit still for very long.
Schools are becoming more digital every year, as is the working world, obviously. But the government's giving us these two very conflicting messages. The digital world can be harmful. Please log in before Monday morning. And obviously we're not blaming teachers here. They don't wake up every morning plotting how to increase children's screen times. Schools operate within government policy, shrinking budget, administrative demands, increasing class sizes, safeguarding requirements, and a world where digital systems are often cheaper and easier to administer than paper ones. This isn't an individual problem, it's a structural one. It's not one school, it's all of them.
How would you feel if a parent could listen in on your child's conversation in the school playground? This is exactly the dilemma that some parents are facing with the new smartwatches with audio available.
We didn't train up teachers on how to use effective education practices on a computer. And now schools all across the country are saying, get the Chromebooks out of the kids' hands.
Some parents started to realize how much technology was being used in the classroom and started to band together to create this movement of less screens or no screens in the classroom. Now the school board just repealed the whole policy because they said it was kind of confusing because you can't opt out of technology. It's woven into the curriculum.
In recent weeks, parents have decided they want to opt out of this technology altogether. They say they understand there's a place for it, but they don't want it to control the classroom.
Does more technology improve learning? We've quietly absorbed the cultural assumption that a digital education is a better one. But when researchers actually go looking for evidence, the picture becomes much more complicated. UNESCO's 2023 Global Education Monitoring Report reviewed evidence from education systems around the world and reached a surprisingly cautious conclusion. Not all change constitutes progress. Well, duh. Technology can be an extraordinary educational tool when it's used deliberately, but simply increasing children's screen exposure doesn't automatically improve academic outcomes. Research such as the 2018 Educational Research Review suggests risks include reduced sustained attention, increased distraction, more multitasking, shallower information processing, and lower reading comprehension on screens for longer texts. It's what's known as the screen inferiority effect. Studies find that, particularly for longer or more complex texts, students tend to understand and remember more when reading on paper than on screen. Researchers suggest that Scrolling, hyperlinks, notifications, and just different reading habits may all contribute to this difference, although the size of the effect varies by age and task. That doesn't mean digital reading is bad, it just means different tools are good at different jobs. Schools are trying to teach attention, whilst technology is actively competing against it. The ability to concentrate and direct one's attention is a fundamental skill. School says, please download this app. Government says, children should spend less time online. Parents say, right then. Maybe the real question isn't whether children should use technology, maybe instead it's if we know these systems are powerful enough that we're considering restricting access to them, what responsibilities do the people designing these systems actually have? But won't your child be left behind others if they don't use technology when they're young? Part 4. Will screen-free children fall behind? We have somehow created this strange cultural belief that the more time children spend using technology, the better they'll become at it. Which sounds logical until you actually look at the evidence. Screen time does not equal digital literacy. If you're around my age, you've probably heard people talk about digital natives. For me, the first time was probably after my boomer parents went to go and visit my Gen X cousin, and they came back raving about how her 2-year-old could easily swipe their phones, finding the photos she wanted to show them. To them, this was like this amazing thing. This little girl was surely destined for tech genius. And, the jury is still out, but she's really good at sports. Well, that's good. The idea was popularised in 2001 by educational writer Mark Prensky, who said, today's students are no longer the people our educational system was designed to teach. Considering school was designed to make us into perfect little factory workers, he's not wrong. It sounds very convincing. Children grow up surrounded by technology, therefore they will naturally become brilliant with technology. Except, that's not what happened.
Kids don't know how to use email. They don't know how to attach files to things. They don't know how to navigate basic print functions on a computer. They are technologically nearly illiterate unless it comes to something like Roblox.
More shocking discoveries I've had in the last day or so is learning that Gen Z basically don't know how to use computers. This just can't be true. I refuse to believe it because they are covered in technology from the second they are born.
Mom, this computer isn't working. I'm tapping the screen and it won't tap. That computer uses a mouse. It's the little clicky thing next to the computer. It's still not working. Computer literacy.
Being comfortable touching a screen isn't the same thing as understanding how touchscreen technology works. Knowing how to swipe, like, scroll, share, subscribe does not mean they are then able to easily search effectively or evaluate sources, organize files on their computers, use spreadsheets, spot misinformation in their reading, protect their privacy, or even build entire websites from scratch easily, which I think was the original assumption of things that these babies will be able to do. Educational researchers have increasingly criticised the idea of the digital native, arguing that familiarity with consumer technology doesn't automatically translate into meaningful digital skills. Professor Esther Hagatai's work, for example, has consistently shown that young people's internet skills vary enormously, and that access to technology is not the same as digital competence. Lots of children know how to use apps. Not many of them know how to use technology. Likewise, children who spend less time with screens are not destined to become digitally illiterate. As the OECD has repeatedly argued, digital competence involves much more than operating devices. It includes evaluating information, communicating responsibly, creating content, protecting privacy, and solving problems in unfamiliar situations. These higher order skills depend on critical thinking and judgment as much as technical familiarity. The skills that make someone good with technology are overwhelmingly human skills. Critical thinking, curiosity, communication, information evaluation, persistence, and creativity. Ironically, these skills are the best developed away from screens. Where do we learn critical thinking?
Arguing with siblings.
Yes, actually. Reading books, building Lego, painting, playing outside, making mistakes, talking to adults. Children learn to ask questions through conversation. They learn persistence through frustration. They learn imagination through play. They learn empathy by interacting with real people. All of those become incredibly useful online later. If you spent years learning how to evaluate evidence, you'll probably become better at spotting misinformation. If you've spent years having thoughtful conversations, you're probably become better at recognizing manipulation. If you've learnt emotional regulation, algorithms have a harder time manipulating your attention. A healthy childhood makes a healthy digital citizen. Right, so banning the internet. The internet isn't just entertainment. I think something gets lost when conversations become entirely focused on keeping children offline, as much as I'm currently keeping my own away from screens, because the internet isn't just where people waste time, it's also where people change history. Think about some of the defining movements of the last decade. Fridays for Future, inspired by Greta Thunberg, grew from one student's protest into a global youth climate movement, with social media helping millions of young people to coordinate demonstrations across continents. The global response to the killing of George Floyd in 2020 was accelerated by videos and social platforms, which enabled documentation, witness testimony, and rapid international mobilization around racial justice. During the Women Life Freedom protests in Iran following the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022, young people used digital platforms to share footage with the outside world, despite intense censorship and internet shutdowns. Researchers and human rights organizations documented how online networks became one of the few remaining ways to communicate with the world as restrictions tightened. More recently, students have used social media to organize demonstrations on issues ranging from climate policy to the war in Gaza, showing how digital spaces have become central to civic participation for many young people. None of that means social media is inherently good, but it does mean it's powerful, and that it can be. The internet without freedom. Around the world, governments have repeatedly shut down the internet during elections, protests, and periods of political unrest. Organizations such as Access Now have documented hundreds of internet shutdowns in recent years, arguing that access to digital communication has become deeply intertwined with freedom of expression, education, and civic participation. When governments switch off the internet, people don't just lose memes, they lose access to news, medical information, support networks, education, evidence, the ability to tell the world what is happening. According to the UN Special Report on Freedom of Expression, access to the internet is increasingly recognised as enabling the exercise of other human rights. We're going to give 16-year-olds the vote in the UK, but at the same time cut off their access to the main place young people get their news, social media? Well, why can't they follow their local MP on Facebook and Twitter? I'm not calling it X, which is where they generally share most of their messaging. More personally, I often think about the messages I have received over the years. Young people telling me, I didn't know disabled adults got married. I didn't know queer families existed. I didn't know I could have children. Well, I didn't either when I was a kid. And that's why I have an Instagram account with my wife where we post our little queer disabled family life, because it is normal. It's also hopeful. Representation doesn't just make people feel seen, sometimes it changes what they believe is possible. So if the answer isn't give every toddler unlimited internet access, and it also isn't keep children offline until adulthood, then what exactly are we trying to teach? Perhaps the goal isn't digital skills. I don't particularly want my children to become experts at scrolling. I'd much rather they became experts at recognizing when something is trying to manipulate them, because that skill will still matter, whatever fancy new technology exists 20 years from now. Part 5. Maybe the goal isn't less technology. If there's one thing I've realised whilst making this video, it's that I don't actually think this is a conversation about screens. It's a conversation about agency, because every generation of parents has worried about the future. We're just the first generation raising children whilst understanding that many of the digital spaces surrounding them aren't simply tools, they're businesses. Businesses competing for attention. Businesses collecting data. Businesses designed, in many cases, to keep us engaged for as long as possible. And yet, those same digital spaces have also helped isolated disabled people to find community. They've helped queer teenagers like me realise we aren't alone. They've allowed young people to organise protests, challenge governments, expose injustice, learn, create, campaign, and imagine lives that previous generations never even knew were possible. Both of those things are true. The internet is neither the villain nor the hero. It's an incredibly powerful environment, which means perhaps our job as parents isn't to pretend we can keep our children away from influence forever, because we can't. Our children will grow up in a world shaped by algorithms, artificial intelligence, social media, and technologies that probably haven't even been invented yet. So maybe success isn't raising children who never encounter those systems. Maybe success is raising children who know how to question them. Children who can stop and ask, who made this? Why does this keep appearing? Who benefits from my attention? Is this actually true? How does this make me feel? Those are the skills that will outlast every app, every platform, and every trend. Perhaps that's the reassuring part, because if we spent our children's early years reading stories together, having difficult conversations, encouraging curiosity, letting them get bored, helping them to think critically, teaching them empathy, then we haven't been keeping them behind, we've been preparing them, not for the technology of today, but for whatever comes next. I don't think intentional parenting has ever meant controlling every part of a child's world. I think it's helping them to become the sort of person who can walk into a complicated world and still know who they are. I would genuinely love to know how you are navigating this in your own family. Have you ever felt the tension between the values you're trying to teach at home and the expectations of the wider world? Not because I think there is one right answer, but because I suspect we are all trying to solve the same impossible puzzle. And in the next video, I want to explore one of the biggest ethical questions of all, because children today don't just consume the internet. Increasingly, they become its content.